Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, November the 3rd, 2025, and today we are talking about small farming versus disasters. It's a tough challenge. Cardboard as a mulch, and when what you do looks bananas to your neighbors. So let's do it. All right. Happy Monday, everyone. Happy November. Indeed. I hope you all are doing well and that you had lovely weekends, and that those of you in the U.S. remembered to turn your clocks back properly, even though, as you all know, moving our clocks around is dumb and it needs to end, as I've talked about in another segment. Now we don't even get the joy of forgetting to turn our clocks back, since all of our devices do that automatically. Rest in peace to all those stories being an hour late or an hour early to things. Anyway, yes, we had a nice weekend here. In fact, this weekend was one of my favorite local events, where a local nursery, shouts to Carvajal's, puts on a Dia de los Muertos festival every year, and it's just awesome. I don't know if there's anything like that near you, but it's very cool if you have an opportunity to go. They invite the community to come and hang out, and they even give everyone tamales and have traditional dancers. It's one of my favorite events, like I said, of the year, and the kids always have a blast. So that was super fun. Also, we got to see a little history in person last night, as our local professional women's soccer team, Racing Louisville, made the NWSL playoffs for the first time in their history. So if my voice is a little hoarse, it's for a good cause. So shouts to Louisville Racing for that. Literally. Okay, so we're continuing on with our mulch series this week. The first segment of every Monday and Tuesday for the next little while, which I recognize is an oddly specific plan, will be mulch based. And this Monday segment, I thought I would dedicate to cardboard, because I've updated to some extent how I feel about cardboard and what to think about it in general. The first thing I feel somewhat obliged to say is that there is often an explosion of semantics when you start talking about cardboard, which is fun, because people in the industry use different terms like paperboard or corrugated fiberboard, and etc. For our purposes, and because most everyone in the world is going to refer to it as cardboard, we're just going to call all of it cardboard. Sorry to the industry folks. Now, with cardboard, I generally think of this, and even things like paper mulches, as supplementary mulches and not just mulches on their own. The reason for this is, well, have you ever heard of wind? Well, wind loves cardboard. So if you have wind and you mulch with just cardboard, you have discovered a superb labor-intensive way to make a giant mess. So cardboards and paper mulches are typically used underneath other mulches, such as compost, but also potentially hay, straw, etc. Again, supplementary. The cardboard works to sort of suppress the weeds underneath, so that by the time the weeds are dead, the cardboard is all but gone, and then you can plant into that bed. Now, cardboards are typically made by creating a pulp from some sort of wood material, adding some sort of glue, maybe a bleach of sorts, though potentially less so with brown cardboards, and then they are pressed into the cardboard itself to render the process completely oversimplified. And so there are some potential contaminants in cardboard, including petroleum products, the glue, mineral oil, etc., and other chemicals such as PFAS. Those are the forever chemicals that we don't want really in our gardens, because they, like the name suggests, last forever. Moreover, there is very little, if any, good research studies on how these chemicals from cardboard behave post-decomposition in the soil, and for how long, or if they become bioavailable to plants, etc. The reason for the lack of research into whether or not chemicals or products used in the cardboard making process have any effect on plants or soil, or cause any real risk to humans, is just not a huge question, on the grand scheme of things, because larger scale growers are not typically relying on cardboard as a mulch. It is, of course, a significant part of many no-till/no-dig operations, so obviously I wish there was more research to it, but, research takes money. So the best I can do is speculate and take bits and pieces from various studies that do exist. Of course, not all cardboards are created the same way, and if you are going to use cardboard in the garden, there are a few things I would look out for. The first thing I would avoid is white cardboards for the bleach, and cardboards with any color inks, or preferably any inks at all. There is no evidence that the chemicals in these will last for a long time in the soil, especially in small concentrations. But if you have your choice, why not avoid them? Also, to be avoided is cardboard with any wax, like any sort of sheen, any sort of glossy texture. These can contain PFAS, forever chemicals, that make them waterproof or fireproof or whatever, which is not something you are going to want to intentionally add to your garden. Ideally, the cardboard material is rough, brown, blank cardboard that you are using. No pizza boxes, no glossy boxes, no ink. I have always had good experiences with using cardboard in starting different garden situations. And although we haven't started beds that way in a long time, actually I haven't really started beds in a long time, period. But I'm not opposed to using cardboard, and I could see myself using that method again in the future following the above rules. To me, putting that carbon back into the soil versus the dump is a better, more environmentally responsible use of all those trees. So anyway, I hope in the future we can get some better research studies on cardboard. But for the moment, I think it's an okay option. Anyway, what say you all? Let me know. And otherwise, we're going to take a quick break. When we return, bringing your neighbors into your ecological madness. BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by Johnny's Selected Seeds. Johnny's Selected Seeds is a proud supporter of Growers Daily. At Johnny's, they do more than sell seeds. They grow them. They trial them to see how they perform on Johnny's research farm in Maine and across the U.S. and Canada. Only the best varieties are added to their catalog and website. When you need proven varieties you can count on and detailed guidance from seedling to harvest, consider Johnny's your trusted growing partner. JohnnySeeds.com. That's JohnnySeeds.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Farmhand. Farmers who partnered with Farmhand say they grew an average of 63% this year because it's more than software. Farmhand is your business coach and assistant, helping to sell out, save time, and grow smarter with real data from real farms, shaping websites that convert, campaigns that sell, and fulfillment systems that run smoothly. Curious what that looks like? Meet the founder, Ari, at farmhand.partners/no-till and see the same insights and support the fastest growing farms rely on every week. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener or viewer, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere the questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Martin Kamaru, who asks, quote, "Hey Jesse, I'm not sure how much experience you personally have with this, but otherwise, hope people in the comments can help. I live in an area I would call rural suburbia, surrounded by fields with groups of 10 to 20 houses here and there. Almost all of my neighbors are stereotypical suburbanites with a quarter-acre plot with just grass. My problem is that I want to foster a good neighborhood feel and to be friendly with my neighbors, but with the area that I am in, part of being friendly is having a nice manicured lawn. They can maybe stretch to it being okay to have a few raised beds and such. Meanwhile, I rented a mini digger and tore my entire 1-acre lawn up to grow food and plants for biodiversity. Basically, what I do is so different from what my neighbors think is okay/normal, and they all think I am completely insane. I was wondering if you have any advice on how to be friendly with your neighbors when what you do is inherently something that they find off-putting. My solution so far has been to grow my hedge as tall as possible so they can't look in and see the quote-unquote mess, and to keep the area they can see as tidy and nice as possible, but I'm not really sure on what to do." End quote. All right, great question. Thank you, Martin. And as my mentor once told me, anything you can do to try and make your neighbors think you're crazy means you're probably doing it right. But obviously, that's a different story in a farming community than a suburban one. I'm sure lots of people are going to have thoughts on this in the comment section, and you're right that we've never really had to deal with this ourselves. Even though we are now in a somewhat of a neighborhood, our neighbors largely don't care what we do as long as it doesn't creep into their yards, I guess. Would they prefer we mowed more and kept things a bit tidier over here? I'm sure, probably. But I also work so much, I think most of them just feel bad for me, so they don't say anything about it. And I do try to keep it looking relatively tidy for them. But anyway, as I always try to emphasize, neighbors are hugely important. They provide a huge value to you as a grower, but also just as a person. And it is important to try and maintain a decent relationship with them where you can. So I appreciate this question a lot for that reason. One mistake I think people make is just forcing the weirdness on people around them. If you want to convert people or at least be accepted by people, the benefits should be apparent. This may mean slightly more thoughtfulness in the implementation of food forests and biodiverse landscapes, or in your case, maybe it sounds like you are containing them a bit with hedgerows and trying to keep them kempt, which I think is important. And I think that's great. But also, biodiverse landscaping can be quite beautiful to anyone, filled with native species, blooming at different times, and even filling out in the winter. And they can make an excellent advertisement for all those things we care about: ecology, biodiversity, food, etc. This, of course, takes a lot of planning and good execution. But if you really want to not only connect to your neighbors, but even inspire them to follow suit, don't hesitate to make it lovely, aesthetically likely. And that isn't even just like a modern concept. I think there's this perception that wild is better. And to some extent that can be true, but we tend to forget how well kept, quote unquote, wild landscapes were pre-colonization, including in Europe, managed through wildfires and heavy concentrations of animals. There are stories of when colonists arrived in America and they were able to march whole armies through the forest for how clear and open these forests were, remarking all the while on how beautiful and abundant everything was, describing the forests like manicured parks. People think lawns are the ultimate expression of cleanliness and beauty, but part of that is just people have not seen the alternative. So give your neighbors something bountiful and beautiful to look at. And I think winning them over won't be the hard part. Having to keep up with all the consultation requests and installation requests is where you will have to draw some boundaries. There are a lot of great books out there on native landscape design that could come in handy. They're from all over the world, so you can probably find one local to you. Even if a lot of it is already installed, that can be an option to sort of incorporate some of those ideas. Then, of course, having a healthy, abundant garden somewhere in there with clean mulch paths or mown paths in my case, or fruit trees or whatever, if you can share in some of that abundance too. I mean, neighbors won't hate on that either. Sometimes, and I'm not saying you are like this, Martin, it certainly seems like you're quite the opposite, but sometimes people want to force their vision of, abundance and all these things on other people. To me, I prefer to think of it as an opportunity to inspire people to want to do the same thing, lead by example, so to speak, or be the alternative, or cultivate the world you want to live in, or insert some other borderline cliche, but you get the idea. I love that you are asking this question, though, Martin, and hopefully you will be inspired to keep it up and infect the neighbors with the bug for more bugs in their own yards. Anyway, that is where my brain went with that question. What say you all? Have you all had to deal with such a situation? Have you had issues with neighbors? Have you had inspirational stories with neighbors? Got them inspired to do something like it, what you're doing on their properties? Let us know. Otherwise, I think we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, small farms and their role in disasters. Be right back. Today's episode is brought to you by High Mowing Organic Seeds. High Mowing Organic Seeds is celebrating their 30th anniversary with 47 fabulous new varieties for 2026. Highlights include downy mildew-resistant cucumbers, a poppy that looks like cotton candy, and 12 new tomato varieties. High Mowing offers more than 750 varieties of certified organic, non-GMO vegetables, flowers, herbs, and cover crops, all trialed for optimal performance in organic growing systems. High Mowing has the professional quality seeds and supportive grower reps to get you from seed to harvest. Visit highmowingseeds.com to request a catalog and use code 26NOTILL, all one word, 26NOTILL, for 10% off your order of $100 or more. That's highmowingseeds.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Marble Seed. The Marble Seed Organic Farming Conference attracts a wide range of regenerative and organic farmers for 3 days of skill development and community building. Farmer Drew Kramer said, "Going to Marble Seed was so invigorating at a time when I needed it most. I picked up tools I'm already using." The conference is the final week in February in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Early registration opens December 4th at conference.marbleseed.org. That's conference.marbleseed.org. All right, back to the show. All right, so with the hurricane that devastated Jamaica last week, I got this email from Peter Edwards, who wrote, quote, "Hello, Farmer Jesse. I promise one day in the future I will become a full Patreon member. No worries, thank you. I'm not sure if this is an appropriate request, but as I watch Hurricane Melissa barrel down on my island home of Jamaica from here in Maryland, just outside Washington, D.C., I wondered if you might provide some thoughts on the role that market garden farming approaches could play in ramping up agricultural production post-disaster event. I suspect some of this may have been covered in the discussion with farmers affected by Helene. Post-hurricane, in a place like Jamaica, there is likely to be a heavy government and industry emphasis on ramping up larger-scale farming, monoculture, to meet demand, but I think the role of smaller-scale, disaggregated multi-crop production could be very important. Traditional small-scale farming, like that my maternal grandfather used to practice, incorporating regenerative approaches before it was even a thing, mulching, etc., needs its own renaissance in Jamaica, as with global trends to shift to larger monoculture approaches were emphasized. I digress. Of course, Hurricane Melissa is more evidence of climate change and its impacts that many here in the U.S. are prone to downplay and disregard. So your thoughts on how small-scale farming/market garden approaches could contribute to relatively rapid scaling of food production to feed people post a natural disaster would be welcome. P.S. Your daily podcasts have been a savior of my sanity in these turbulent political times. Thanks again, Peter Edwards, end quote. All right, thank you, Peter. And this is an interesting question. question. Obviously, I don't work in disaster relief, so these are just the thoughts that I have based on experiences of myself and other growers I know who have gone through things like hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, etc. The one thing I will start with here is that governments should support people in times of disaster. They need to be ready to do that. Full stop. There is no easy way for the average person to fully prepare for the effects of a hurricane or other similar disaster, especially on an island, but really anywhere. Most people do not have the funds to build a hurricane or tornado or flood-proof infrastructure all the way through their farm. So not only will these farmers affected be supported by their own governments, but by other governments as well. Where, however, does small farming or can small farming play a role in disaster relief is a really interesting question. On the recovery side, in terms of rapid scaling up of food production, I would honestly say that this sort of production only plays kind of a small role with some caveats. What I mean is that, yes, you could have radishes and lettuces and other greens within a matter of weeks following, a devastating hurricane or other devastating event, and you should try where possible. But what people really need immediately is clean water and calories, meat and potatoes effectively. So the government probably will put the focus on some of those monocultures. The greens will come in handy soon after, and the timing might be perfect, but for starters and in great abundance, people will just need to eat healthy, substantial food, which is where the government can really step in there. However, to me, having a way, potentially, like kits of some sort to distribute to small farms to scale up, like something like meat chickens, which take about 8 weeks, and mushrooms, which take about 8 weeks for like oysters that can be grown on cardboard, which is somewhat abundant after a devastating disaster like this. Ideas like that could be a helpful way of getting some local production going quickly, as well as to supplement outside and government aid, while also transitioning back to relying more on their own production. I think, some of those things, when they see how fast some of that stuff could be produced, especially some of those really important calories, that could be inspiring to some growers. So there may be that effect. Now, with that said, to the part of your question that touches on resilience, I think this is definitely one thing that small farming can offer to some extent. Resilient soils and diversified crops, which will limit the damage from some major storms. Absolutely, those things can come in handy depending on the extent of the damage. Some of the damage we're seeing out of Jamaica, of course, whole farms are underwater. There is only so much resilient farming can do in that scenario. I also think that having citizens with the, savoir-faire to grow lots of food in tight spaces is absolutely an asset to any country or region going through natural disasters, because flooding can contaminate soil for quite a while, and the uncontaminated spaces might be minimal and need to be maximized to meet demand. And so in my mind, governments need to be supporting those small scale growers, because you never know when you're going to need that level of expertise. Obviously, there's a lot more to this question, and to disaster relief, people will be mourning the loss of lives, businesses, communities, culture, historical spaces, all of it. And we definitely send our love to everyone in Jamaica and everyone all over the world that's going through these sorts of disasters. Ground and houses will be polluted for many months, if not years to come. Cleanup will be a very long process. So I think small farming certainly plays a role there, but I also think that it is especially true if small farming embraces its role in communities leading into disasters, where maybe it's food that is needed, but maybe it's just someone to help distribute aid, clean up houses, rebuild, and just take care of others. I think that is definitely a place small farming skills, and sometimes small farms themselves, can be an asset. Absolutely. The people and the skills and the strength and the ingenuity that those growers have can come in really handy. Skills are so important. It's something that people can't take away from you. When I watch one of these like commercials of somebody, picking flowers at a bodega and asking their app to tell them which flowers to get and how long they'll last, it just is so disappointing to me. Like, that is a skill that you could develop to know how long a flower will last or how to grow some food. That once you have it, nobody can take it away from you. So that's, I don't know. I just see such value in that. Anyway, those are my thoughts, especially if you have disaster relief experience. Let us know your thoughts. Otherwise, I think that's it for this Monday. Don't forget, No Till Growers is now officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor this show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat, like a Soil Nerd hat, or a copy of the Living Soil Handbook to support our work. Do that over at notillgrowers.com. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of November, you get a shout on the show. So big shout outs today to Fluxion, Fluxion? Something like that. Awesome. And Carmen Bluebow. So yeah, shouts to our new Patreon members over the weekend. You all rock. We're going to go back to our single day short stories for a bit through our, what we consider kind of our slow season, the winter, like last winter. But anyway, today's story is about Leonard. Leonard is a barber, and as a barber, Leonard hears everything, sometimes a bit too much of everything. This day, Leonard hears from a husband that's been cheating on his wife, and then when he goes to cut the hair of that man's son, the barber is stunned to find out that the son is also aware of the affair and wants to talk about it. But Leonard dutifully listens as he snips away quietly. Anyway, that pair leaves, and then later that day, Leonard is cleaning up by himself, and a woman storms into the shop and says, "I know that you know things. My husband and son came in here earlier, and I'm trying to figure out if my husband is having an affair. And when I asked my son what he knew, he said, I don't know, why don't you ask the barber?" And so the barber, stunned and a bit scared, but not surprised really, looks at her and says, "I don't repeat what's said in the barber chair, but I'm happy to give you a trim if you need to vent." And so she does, and she tells him all about her own affairs while he smiles, nods, and trims. Thanks for watching and or listening. We shall see you tomorrow for Tuesday. I like Tuesdays. Yeah, why not? Bye.
Some peace.